Already live? Oh, hi everyone. It's Thursday, it's 6 p.m. in Kiev, and that means that we're about to start our live Q&A session, and we are joined today by Murray and John. They're both fighting in the International Legion of DIU. Murray is representing the Ronin team Ronin, and John is from Vanguard team. So hello guys, it's very nice to see you here again.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
How have you been?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, you've been going through some recovery in Kiev right now. So how is that going for you both? What's up with you, basically?
Yeah, doing well. I think we're both recovering some minor to significant injuries, but yeah, both taken care of well by the medical process. So recovery's good.
Yeah, just got done doing some physical therapy, electrotherapy, which is pretty good.
Right. Our topic of this live session is about the second anniversary of the liberation of Kherson. And I know that you both took part in this campaign. So first of all, our first question will be, what were your tasks there at the time? Could we speak a little bit about that? And I guess I'll start with Murray because he's sitting closer to me and can.
Yeah, absolutely. So our operations in the Kherson Oblast were conducted in the northern part of the Oblast, where it bordered the Mykolaiv Oblast and Kherson region. There's quite a extensive river network. It's about 60, 70 kilometers kind of direct north from Kherson itself. We went in there originally kind of, I don't want to say looking for work, but say generating opportunities. And so we did a lot of shaping operations and came up with a lot of planning to push to the local brigades in the area and the battle tactical groups that were looking for an opportunity to do a breakthrough. So we tried to find opportunities where we could spearhead that breakthrough and say, okay, if we do this operation or this smaller raid with these supporting tasks, it's going to give you an opportunity to follow through and kind of punch through that area. Yeah.
Okay, John?
Yeah, we were in the same team, so we were doing pretty much the same. Yeah, we were doing.
So you were both parts of Ronin at the time, or how did it work?
No, it was. Yeah, we were under a different designation at the time, but yeah, we were doing the same stuff. Like you said, we were doing shaping operations, going out there, reconning the area, probing the lines to see where we could or couldn't do any kind of breakthrough activities or missions.
Basically, we can call it reconnaissance, right? Or not really?
A lot of reconnaissance work was part of it. A lot of different teams or aspects of the team doing drone work and then on the ground reconnaissance and mapping, confirming what we saw on the maps. But then we did do more aggressive actions too, preparatory strikes on identified enemy positions. Said, okay, we knew, one example where a heavy machine gun nest was on the route that we were trying to get into the town. So we said, let's go ahead and take that out in advance. So one of the dudes from the team did a fantastic job of destroying that with a javelin, and it kind of opened the door, if you will. Yeah.
Kherson area, and as well as Mykolaiv, it's a steppe, right? It's a very flat ground with almost no, tree lines or forest to hide in, and everyone who fought there calls it a nightmare, especially for reconnaissance. So how did you work with that issue at the time? Basically, how did it work?
Other than very carefully.
Yeah, always carefully. And I think looking back on it, one of our saving graces that at the time the drone warfare wasn't quite as developed as it is. Looking back through some of the footage that I have, I was super thankful and just amazed by the lack of overhead drones at the time. I think about that terrain now, and I'm like, oh, it would be horrible with how many more drones there are. But ultimately, I think in that area, because you're 100% right, it's super open terrain. So it came down to speed. I think a lot of our infills and exfills by vehicle and that were quite long, and we just hammered it. I mean, some of those drives in were some of the fastest, like hanging onto the back of the truck, just really trusting that driver the most. And then as soon as you park that car and conceal it, getting yourself overhead cover and hiding for any potential drones. So doing actions very, very quickly and in small groups, working in quite small teams, doing independent actions so we don't make pick up a lot of notice that way. Yeah.
I actually did drive, was one of the drivers for one of our infills that we did, and yeah, it was just like hauling ass down the road, freaking, you're doing it in a 3 or 4 vehicle convoy too, right? So you're hauling, but you're also trying not to ram into the guy in front of you too. Doing it blacked out with, nods on and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just like you find some sort of cover, tree line, the few tree lines that we have, dump the vehicles, dismount as quickly as possible, and then, you're on foot movement as quickly as possible. You're doing fast marching everywhere we went. So yeah, it was, speed was definitely the biggest advantage that we had that we tried to, utilize as much as possible on that.
Do you think, is it possible to conduct a similar kind of assault now at the situation we have now at any kind of our extremely vast front line? What do you think?
Absolutely. The drone warfare, like I say, that's a huge obstacle, but it's an obstacle that can be overcome with smart preparation and planning. Commanders looking at the landscape of the battlefield and finding weaknesses in areas that may be like weaknesses in the enemy line, or it may just be like terrain that we can exploit. Smart assessment of those zones of responsibility and like where we're working. If you can find those weaknesses to exploit, then you absolutely can get work like this done. We may change some of our tactics and our procedures in such a way like we've gone down to working in maybe smaller groups, or maybe the terrain allows us to work in bigger groups. Small adjustments like that, depending where we are. But this kind of work is a crucial element of warfare still, and it's not going anywhere. It just might get harder sometimes.
I mean, you look at some of the reports that come out, and one of the things I've noticed personally is that the Russian troops that they have right now on the lines is they're just incapable or not trained to respond to rapid assaults like that. They very quickly lose cohesion. A lot of times I see in some of the reports or even some of our own actions that we've done and everything, they lose it. They have zero command and control on the ground that is able to respond because either their commanders are somewhere behind the line, sitting in a bunker somewhere, and they might have one radio out on the front line, and that guy he's confused. He's trying to figure out where we're hitting, how many of us there are, and he's not thinking about getting on the radio, or they're just not prepared for it. So, I mean, the tactic itself does have, it does have its uses, and it does work effectively. But like Murray said, that's something that you have to plan for and make really smart decisions on before you implement that. Because if you just try to get in there rapidly with no plan, that's just a recipe for disaster on your own part.
Thanks. And since we brought up a little bit of the electronic warfare topic, I have, and I would like to make the appeal. So at the moment, one of the units from the International Legion DIU is in need of the purchase of electronic warfare device, and we are asking you kindly to participate in our fundraising. You can see the QR code on the screen, or you can see the PayPal link in the description for the video. The amount is roughly $7,000 US, so we are encouraging you, and we would really, really appreciate your help, because that thing basically saves lives. So if you will, please follow the link or QR code. All right, let's, if you have something to add, then please, but we might as well move to our next question. So, I believe Kherson was not really your first campaign in Ukraine. You've already had experienced something similar. How did it go for you? Because it was a massive operation.
Yeah.
Did you take part in something similar, like for example, Kharkiv counteroffensive, or what was your previous experience in Ukraine, and how did you cope with such a massive task as a Kherson region liberation?
Yeah. I think for both of us, no, we hadn't really done anything at that scale yet at that time, just due to when we entered the team. John and I both joined quite close together. So this was definitely one of like the first really large offensive operations. But I mean, speaking personally, it's probably one of the favorite operations that I've gotten to take part in, just because of the freedom of like operational planning and the preparation phases that we had. Like if we had ideas on how to have good effect on the battlefield, small scale operations that could shape the landscape a bit, we had the opportunity to go and do that, be it from reconnaissance or those like pre-strike missions that we did. And then there was a lot of input from more junior members on like the actual operation itself. And then seeing how that tied into like an entire brigade's overall plan for a counteroffensive, and that the kind of like they were really counting on this operation to be a success, is a pretty cool thing. Yeah, unique experience.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my high points. You know, for my participation in this war and everything, that the objectives that we achieved for this operation and everything was just, it made you feel good, made you feel like you actually were contributing something, you know. And yeah, I mean, to this day, it's one of my favorite stories to, you know, recollect and talk to some of my junior team members who are coming in and asking me like, oh, what's it like here and everything. Oh, yeah, you know, I got to basically play SOCOM in real life. So yeah, so it will stay with me for the rest of my life, that particular operation.
Do you remember the November 11th of 2022? How did you know that Kherson was liberated, or were you actually in the first convoys to enter the city?
No, we were stationed in Zaporizhia at the time, right?
Yeah,
we were stationed in Zaporizhia at the time. So when the first convoys were actually going into Kherson itself, so yeah, we found out from, I want to say we found out from our commander first, before we started seeing it pop up on the news, and it was pretty close though. You know, the media was all over that particular event, right? They were all over it. So I think we found out maybe a few hours before, at least from my recollection, we probably found out a few hours before started seeing the first like news media drops. But yeah, it was you know, you still felt it, right? You still felt that sense of accomplishment. Like, yes, we finally got that. You know, we got that big win there. You know, you see in the pictures and the videos of all the people who had to sit there under that occupation. You know, I kind of had a sense of jealousy for some of the guys who were out there, because it was just like, all right, cool. You know, just to see and experience that. But even at a distance, you know, I still felt it. The assistance and the just pure emotion that was there. So yeah, it was definitely a high, you know, that got you going. You're like, yes, we're doing it, and motivated us to, you know, continue that work and, you know, put in that same amount of effort in the stuff that we were doing at the time.
Did it feel maybe for a moment that like the war is almost over? Because I heard some these opinions. I also was very skeptical. I was like, no, it's definitely not the end. But some people, journalists or even soldiers, were like, oh yeah, it's the major thing. Now it's gonna be over very soon. Well, which didn't happen. Did you had a
I don't think so, due to, like John mentioned, the fact that like we had concluded our operations in the region mid-September and then moved on to a new area operation. So at that time, we had kind of concluded what we were doing and then just jumped right back into the workup for different ops. So we were pretty focused on like, okay, what's next? And the work that was to come was quite monumental itself. So what had just happened was rapidly kind of shifted out of everybody's view and was like, all right, here's the next one. So I think at the time, no one was thinking this is the end of it, not from our group at least.
So in your opinion, what was the crucial point to make this whole operation successful, if any?
Yeah, I would say once we identified, like, we had like small scale plans in the area and we'd been sending out multiple reconnaissance operations, checking out like neighboring villages and stuff, and we understood like the local brigades objectives. Like we knew what their plan was. They're like, okay, this is where we want to get to. This is our what we've been assigned as like our goal for the region. So we wanted to, okay, what can we do to assist that? And then once we checked out some places and we're like, this isn't feasible, we can't really do work to help them here. Once we saw this opportunity come up and then we started looking at some of the ways that we could get it done within our skill set, and kind of just like, I wouldn't say it spiraled, but it snowballed, I guess, of like, good idea after good idea, I guess. I don't know if they were all great ideas, but there was a lot of potential there for us to get it done. And then so being able to take that plan to the brigade, and you're kind of just like fingers crossed that they accept this, because it had been kicked back in different phases a few times. And they were like, yeah, it's greenlit. And we're, okay, now we're doing this. That made it very real for us.
I mean, it's kind of hard to get like a different opinion on it, because, again, we were doing the same thing. So yeah, I mean, the turning point, like for me, I think the introduction and the infusion of the HIMARS system added to our overall arsenal. Or available assets that we were able to use, because we did actually, our command actually did, was able to get that asset to assist us, and having that there was cool. It's really the only way to explain that. It was pretty cool, just from some of the safe house that I was in, while we're planning, while we're waiting for certain, either weather conditions or other assets to get into place and everything, you seeing those HIMARS launch, seeing them actively being used, things are still progressing. And, I mean, I don't even think at this time the Russians still don't really have an answer for just that one weapon system. And at the time, I think we had, six, it was like six
in the region.
Yeah, but it was like at the time, like they had just arrived in country.
Yeah.
I think we only had like between 6 and 12 of them at the time, and they were making such a massive impact on the battlefield. You saw them operating from all across the line, and wherever they operated, the line would actually push forward pretty much. So that's I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest turning points that allowed us to do what we were able to do.
Yeah, the favorite media's game changer, right?
Yeah.
So what could be comparable to HIMARS back in the days? Do we have some, have you noticed any tool, device, weapon system that has the same effect nowadays? What could be compared? Because F-16s were a big hope. Do you see it helping out? Do you see it working with or not F-16, maybe something else? What would be a thing that you would like to point out in terms of actual tools, not the people working?
I'd say I've seen great effect from the French hammer munitions. Super effective. That's a really good system. and I've seen it be put to use in like our different areas that we've worked up north. It's been used a few times quite effectively. That's a great munition. It does rely on like being released by an aircraft, yeah, so there's a bit more risk than the HIMARS in some ways, but getting more of those kind of munitions into the hands of like skilled Ukrainian pilots or operators, massive effect on the battlefield.
I'd say the introduction or the addition of the ATACMS to the HIMARS
Yeah,
system,
that's a good one.
getting that range out there, just again, no answer for it from the Russian side. They either can't or they have very few assets that are able to intercept that particular system. I mean, we've seen on the news, training camps that are out there and they're out in formations and they're like having a good old time, whatever they're doing, and then you just see the cluster munition that the ATACMS have, and it just wipes out that entire grid square. On a smaller scale, though, the addition of the U.S.-made cluster rounds for the artillery systems that we have. I mean, those I've had those working in my particular zone so many times, and hearing gunshots coming from towards our line, and rounds whipping overhead, and you're just like, crap, I'm pinned down, I can't do anything, and you just hear that one round. And then everything's so quiet, and you're like, thanks, guys.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we've talked about like these fancy munitions, that are really helpful, and munitions are great, but at the end of the day, you need like skilled individuals to guide those munitions. So the human aspect of it, that throughout this entire war, Ukrainians have done such a good job of adapting and training on these systems that are just here. Now you got to figure out how to use this. So having dudes like close combat controllers and dudes working that like JTAC or TAC-P role, kind of guiding those munitions in and coordinating with the artillery, and how good a job people have done of learning that kind of form of how to work that. Like call for fire isn't a really simple thing, and especially not working with aircraft. So how rapidly people have been trained on how to put those munitions exactly where they want them makes all the difference.
Talking about guided munition, next big thing, sadly not from Ukrainian side, but from Russian, is what I hear a lot about during last couple weeks, is wire-guided FPVs.
Yeah.
What do you know? Have you heard? Have you seen? I mean, obviously there are some obstacles like height and just physical obstacles, but what have you heard? What do you know about them? How big of an issue is that?
It's a pretty considerable issue, like we've been talking about, and you mentioned through the fundraising that EW absolutely does save lives, right?
Well, not in this case, no.
But that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Modern warfare is a game of, okay, we've got this way to kill people, now we're going to adapt and come up with a countermeasure, and then you adapt the way to kill people, and then the countermeasure has to adapt. And this one, drones were becoming, I wouldn't say they're becoming obsolete by any means, but people had figured out a way of defeating them with EW, right? Or defeating them to a degree. That EW becomes completely obsolete when you just attach a wire and fly it in like that. So that is a big issue. When you start to pair that up with the advances in AI and like targeting, where you don't even necessarily need a human operator, or you can target lock with a wire-guided munition, serious issues there. Very, very dangerous munitions. But like I was saying, we will see a countermeasure develop to that as well. I mean, right now you've got drones flying around with a bundle of optic cable on the bottom of it. That's a larger, more cumbersome target, easier to take out. You just have to sever that optic cable, and okay, it's not going to be able to be controlled anymore. So pros and cons to everything, but yeah.
Not to mention the literal red trail that it has
Absolutely,
going back to the
yeah.
operator, because one of the biggest things that all drone operators on both sides, they fear is, counter battery, just like with the, mortar teams and artillery. You get a couple shots off, and then it's hide back in your hole and hope they don't find out where you were shooting from. You got a wire-guided FPV coming at you and everything. All right, cool. It hit its target or hit near it. I'm going to just follow the line, either with another drone, or I'm going to send out a body to go out and that tree line over there, that's where he is, and then you're just going to pepper the area with it.
All right. Just to remind you, our dear viewers, that we having an ongoing fundraising for the Astra team in the International Legion DIU. We are fundraising $7,000 to purchase an electronic warfare device that will definitely help the guys and will save their lives, because wired FPVs are not that common, thanks God. There's a QR code, there's a link in the description. Please take your time and support the unit. Okay, let's move a little bit back in the days of the Kherson counter-offensive. Was there a day or a moment, a part of the time that you realized it's liberated, the day that was the most memorable for you? Maybe something very good happened, or maybe something not so good happened, but it was the day that you are going often back in your mind, thinking of it.
I'd say it's probably the highlight of my career in Ukraine thus far. John said it, that that was one of those places where you're like, wow, I'm doing video game shit, pardon my language, video game stuff that it's kind of surreal. So I had an opportunity to work with a really, really talented individual, Dan Swift, rest his soul, but he was a Navy SEAL, and he and I went on just a two-man reconnaissance, not wearing plates or anything, just rifles and night vision, swam down a river together. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I made this mistake of offering up the fact that I could swim, and they were like, cool, you go on this reconnaissance now. Yeah, and but that is probably, to this day, one of the most surreal things I've ever done in Ukraine. And yeah, it's going to be a hard one to beat.
Yeah, swimming out of that.
Yeah, that
mission
actually
was probably one of my biggest highlights, because U.S. Marines are known as an amphibious fighting force. Fighting in Iraq, we did none of that. So I come from a generation of Marines who very few of us have actually done anything amphibious related, and here I am. Just like in a so-called 80s or 90s action movie, swimming next to a Zodiac with just my head out in the water, wearing nothing but my helmet and NVGs, and just kind of swimming out of there while being chased by an artillery piece in Loom. It's just shh, quiet.
Definitely sounds like something, video game movie. I'm glad that everything went well.
We got everybody out. That's the most important thing.
I saw a video that you shared with you taking Russian POWs.
Yeah.
You probably also have encountered them. So how was it? What did they feel? What was their reaction when they realized that you're not Ukrainians, you're foreigners? Was there anything interesting, specific? Because I cannot imagine how, possibly what was going on in the head of these people that were thinking they're fighting NATO, and now they're captured by you guys.
Yeah, I imagine it was a pretty confusing situation for them, because we were on the same team, but this was a joint team operation. Mm-hmm. So we had groups of dudes, a large contingent of French-speaking individuals. We also had some extremely talented but quite maniac British dudes working with us, great soldiers, and so the combination of hearing all these different languages being shouted and spoken as their position is rapidly getting surrounded and destroyed around them was probably pretty what in the world is happening? And then we had, myself and another individual, had the opportunity to transport those prisoners after the conclusion of operations back to Kyiv. So for whatever reason, our command decided to have two Westerners be the drivers for these dudes. So we're having conversations, and these dudes are probably what has happened to us? Where are we going? We thought the Ukrainian side captured us, but these dudes just speak English. What is happening? I imagine they were incredibly confused. Yeah, it was probably a stressful 24 hours.
Did they try to establish the contact with you? Like, did they try to speak to you maybe?
No, we were pretty strict with them. Like, don't take your blindfold off. Don't try to talk at all. Strict, but we were, they're still humans at the end of the day. We established pretty quick that they were DPR, LPR individuals. Yeah, so they weren't actual Russians themselves. But at the end of the day, like at that point, they were prisoners, and despite what had just happened in combat actions or whatever, like you have to treat them with a degree of humanity. Yeah, so like if they gave them water, gave them food and that within reason, not their parents. Like I'm not going to take care of them, but like they were. We didn't talk to them. No, there was the obvious language barrier there too, but minimal contact. Yeah.
What about you, John?
I was this close to dumping my entire can of PKM ammo into them. I mean, we approached we had just gotten done surrounding their building that they were in, which was this rickety old barn. And we were trying to figure out how best to get them either to come out to us or go in and clear them. And the ground force commander, who was Dan at the time, they were talking and trying to figure out how to get in there. And I kind of leaned over. I'm like, hey, Dan, just so you know, I have 1,000 rounds of machine gun ammo here that I don't want to carry anymore. So can I? He's like, your plan B. We're going to try and get them out. So we eventually got them out. We had a couple Russian and Ukrainian speakers on our team, so we were able to, communicate with them that way. And we were telling them, hey, come out. You're surrounded. Surrender peacefully. Throw down your weapons. Come on out. To which they answered that we could go F ourselves. And then like, okay. And we set off an RPG. One of our guys launched an RPG, which went through the building, went off, and they're like, okay, we're done, we surrender. And then they come out. So a few of them were wounded and everything, and our medics, they, again, like Murray was saying, at the end of the day, they're human beings. There are rules to war as much as some people who are fighting this don't think so. There are rules, and if you surrender, we take care of you, and we did. We rendered aid. We rendered as best aid that we could before extracting them, to which Murray took over.
Well, since you brought up the rules, have you encountered any unconventional actions from Russian army, and how did you work with it? What were your response, and what was happening from the Russian side? Because on the civilian side, obviously, we heard a lot about the humanitarian law violation.
Mm-hmm.
We also heard a lot about war crimes. So, did you notice personally any of that?
One of the most frustrating and like widespread things that we've seen, it seems like a minor point, but it just adds to the confusion of the battlefield, is the Russians' propensity to wear the same camouflage that we're using, or if they have the opportunity to wear like the Ukrainian digital pixel camo. Seen that all over the place, be it Russians utilizing multicam, which is like, okay, that's quite a widespread camouflage. I can understand that one a bit more, but in places like Bakhmut, we saw it all the time where they were intentionally utilizing captured Ukrainian uniforms just to add to that chaos and confusion. Probably one of the most frustrating things I've seen for sure, yeah.
We had a couple guys report from my team actually in one of our more recent operations that we did. They actually had spotted a group of Russians. It was like 2 or 3 guys walking around, but they were clearly on the Russian side of the conflict, and they were actually wearing our own tape. Some of them. So,
that's a big one
like
too.
Both sides use their own tape, right? They use white and red. We use, our colors, and they saw, like, do we have guys on the other side? No, why? Got dudes walking around with blue tape. That's weird, and we confirmed that they weren't actually ours after confirming everybody had full accountability of everybody. And we're like, all right, yeah, no, shoot them. But yeah, definitely looking like the enemy to confuse them even more is just, it's infuriating. Kind of brings me back over to Iraq and everything, where you have, you know, terrorists that are dressed up like civilians. So it's like, I cannot identify who I'm fighting. I have to take extra precautions, and the time that it takes for me to try to identify them, it's time lost and possibly lives lost at that point. So yeah, it definitely is infuriating that they are starting to do that. I think more and more actually now. Yeah. It's a little more commonplace now. So yeah, it's definitely infuriating to see that.
Agreed, and especially now on Kherson suffers a lot from so-called human safari tactic that Russians are using widely. So my question is, after the liberation, I know you came back to the liberated city of Kherson. What were your emotions at that time, seeing it a year after? What changed that you noticed? How was it for you the next time you came back?
The only time I've been back to Kherson would have been in November, immediately after the liberation, for an award ceremony there. So we got to take part in some of the celebration on the street and stuff, and that was pretty incredible.
Nice, yeah.
I had, my girlfriend's from Kherson, and so she has family members living there, so we get a pretty up-to-date look at what's going on, and unfortunately living in some of the more dangerous parts of the city. And then all her friends are from there, of course, too. So quite a few people that I'm in touch with through that are hearing a lot about what's going on. So it is... I'm amazed by the people who are hanging on there still and are able to make a life there. I just hope that they stay safe every day, because it's an incredibly dangerous thing. It's one of the most abhorrent things that I can think of, that we are going to see the opportunity to target civilians, non-combatants in any way, shape, or form. There's no confusion about that, and that's going to be a training metric for us getting our drone pilots. I can't fathom that as this is the kind of mentality that a military is having, but we see Russia behave that or display that kind of behavior all the time. So it shouldn't be surprising, but it is nonetheless incredibly shocking.
What? Yeah.
I haven't personally been back to the any of our actual areas there, either in Kherson itself or back to our village, but I did actually get the opportunity to interact with a friend of mine. Works with an NGO, and they actually visited the town that we had assaulted, and actually helped push through and everything. And I got to see some of the video of the area. And this was actually shortly after the Russians had blown up the dam, so there's a lot of water damage. There's still the water levels are still pretty high at this point. But seeing that there was life returning to this small village, right? That was pretty positive. I was like, oh wow, it's I know that building, Obviously, there are still destroyed buildings from the actual actions that were taken within that village, but to see that there are, the civilian populace is starting to return was really, really good to see, because that just further proves, the tenacity and the fighting spirit of the people here, where it's just the Russians are not going to take this from us, Once we get what once was ours back, we're going to take it back. And these people in this village were proving that by, taking back their homes and starting to slowly rebuild. I think in the video I saw that they were just starting to repave one of the main roads in the town. You see some minor construction going on with some of the storefronts and a couple of the houses there. So yeah, that was really nice to see. Really, really proud, and again, that feedback, right? Of you did something here, and now you actually see the fruits of your labor. Bearing those fruits and flowers. So that was a feel-good moment, a really good feel-good moment.
I can't help but think now about the Kakhovka Dam. explosion, destruction by Russians. In your opinion, how did that influence the course of war at that time? Because Ukraine at the time was preparing for the 2023 counteroffensive, big one, which it went how it went, right? Did Kakhovka Dam played a part in it? So yeah, basically, what's changed? How things changed after the Kakhovka Dam? What was it a big deal in terms of like military, tactical, and strategical level also?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it rapidly, within 24 hours, changed the landscape down there, which changed the whole tactical picture. Routes that people were using to get to the zero line are no longer viable. I mean, now we've seen the rise in like using of boats and stuff down there to reach the left bank. So I think it kind of, in a lot of ways, it stagnated the line differently. The Russians kind of were able to take that breathing pause. It's a lot harder for the Ukrainians to reach them because they were on the back foot for a long time there. Really, I mean, it looked for a little while like it was just going to keep rolling back. Like, at what point are they going to stop losing ground? We were making some monumental gains, and then that incident occurred, which kind of just separated everything, gave the Russians that breathing room and kind of dig in their lines again. So drastically, I think it slowed down all the efforts along that sector, unfortunately, and kind of stalled the momentum, but that will happen. That was a pretty unprecedented move on the Russians' part. I don't think a lot of people saw that one coming. So
definitely a big pause button on the whole operation.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is it, just speaking theoretically, so the Kakhovka reservoir is basically like drying out. Is it possible to become a new, like, how you say, Plattsdarm, the big land way to convey offensive, both from Russian side or from Ukrainian side? Could this new landscape be shaped into something that will serve as a new offensive like way?
I think that it's something that people will probably keep an eye on in terms of their like defensive posture in those areas. But one of the things about rivers and like it's a basin at the end of the day, right? So it's a bowl. You are going to see people trying to use that land route for a very, very long way off. And once you're in that bowl, and if that terrain's like boggier than you thought it was, you start getting vehicles and stuff stuck. You are a sitting duck, like you are a big old target there. So I wouldn't anticipate anyone trying to utilize that terrain without significant reconnaissance, and like you'd probably see the work being done ahead. But speaking about the Russians, for sure, you're going to notice that kind of like if they're aiming at trying to use that. But yeah,
something like that, you'd definitely be using and allocating major resources to try and take advantage of something like that. Like he said. Trying to make use of that requires a lot of manpower or reconnaissance. And then if you were going to use it as a route for transport, if you're going to try and use a terrain feature like that as maybe even a staging area, there's going to be a lot of buildup going on there, and you can't hide that. You can't hide that. It's just like how we saw for months and could watch in real time the Russians building up their defenses in the south and everything. We saw that every single day. There was no hiding it. They weren't trying to hide it because it's impossible to do so. But we couldn't stop it either, right? At least not at that point in the war and everything. So something like that coming down the road, I don't think we're going to. I don't think that would be something that we probably actually do, but I'm not paid to think that high up.
Okay. So like Kakhovka Dam was like kind of a preventive strike, I guess, from Russians. But how were they defending at the time of the Kherson counteroffensive? How did they act? Were they something new that you had to learn and adapt to, or was it or was it something that you already experienced in Ukraine that you've been actually prepared for? Maybe something new, I don't know.
Our operation was I don't want to say like a super unique situation, but I will say that our commanders did a good job of looking at the tactical situation on the ground and the disposition of the enemy forces in the region, specifically like where the major battle groups of the enemy were billeting and like keeping their reserve forces and stuff, because we came up against those like LPR dudes pushing into the town and like establishing the kind of bridgehead at that river crossing. But getting friendly forces across that river en masse was the main thing we were trying to establish. So securing that land bridge. By not actually keeping their forces or reserve forces in the town itself, we were essentially just fighting like outpost forces, like small groups of dudes, those LPR guys, really guys who were unprepared for a significant sized force to come up against them. And then the Russians shot themselves in the foot, proverbially speaking, because they just set themselves up perfectly for HIMARS and long-range munitions to have maximum effect on their forces, because they tried to push back into the town. Their tactical groups were staged not too far out the town, but outside of it. And then they kind of just like tried to, they were good dudes, like they were vetiver and they had special forces components with them, but they just tried to like convoy into the town. And then so our outside observers, drone dudes spotting for the like 777s and the tanks that we had on call and the HIMARS, just picked those dudes apart and just turned them into one big old roadblock of vehicles, dead vehicles. And then dudes tried to move in on foot. They saw where they went. Those buildings got destroyed. So they kind of created like a standoff, if you will, like a bit of separation between our infantry forces and their vastly numerically larger force, but then they just got hammered by indirect fire. So it worked out pretty well for us in that. I think that they didn't anticipate that specific area being our objective. There were larger objectives to the east and west of us, and they were well positioned to react to threats to those. But in our area, they failed to identify a potential threat, and we capitalized on that pretty significantly. So I'd say their tactics there, to answer your question, were pretty poor on their commander's side. You would have thought that they would see that potential like crossing happening and do something about it, but I think they were just complacent, and it messed it up for them.
I think of, other than the one overwatch position they had at the top of the hill there and everything, they didn't have like our beachhead landing ran into like no resistance.
Like 8 dudes in that house, and they got smoked within an hour.
Yeah, I mean they didn't have any like, there were no observation posts that we identified
that we didn't destroy ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah, okay. There weren't any, but they weren't any observation posts like on the riverbank itself. They had a pretty substantial standoff from the riverbank itself. So anybody could have gone in, could have been traveling up and down. You know, if we were drug runners, we would have gotten through, no problem. Weapons. But yeah, you know, they had no observation posts there. So like Murray was saying, extremely poor. Not to mention the personnel that they had there were just your conscripts, essentially. You know, all their special guys were over here smoking and joking while they had the local guys doing whatever they were doing, which wasn't watching.
We have a question from Jean. She's Eugene, who's watching us right now. And so the question is the following: what is the difference in the infantry tactics on both sides at the time? How did the Ukrainian tactics? I'll rephrase it. So, how did Ukrainian infantry tactics differ from Russians? Maybe we can summarize what you said, just so Eugene will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking from our experience, that we typically use more of what we grew up with, so Western tactics for the most part, but I see that being utilized massively by the Ukrainian forces now anyway. So in that case, we were using like raid tactics, and that we like sent in a light reconnaissance force to make sure everything was good. Once we established a small entry, had that secure, we just absolutely hammered them with like a precision infiltration of really good soldiers to a specific area, and then once we had that point established, the idea was okay, like mass Ukrainian troops are going to follow on. I mean, we had dudes from the Legion there, but we were also working with Ukrainian soft counterparts for that operation. I can't name names, but you know who you are. And they were fantastic on the ground with us. So it was really using skilled infantry, and then coming back to that speed idea, if we maintained our momentum, we didn't just get there and sit in one spot. We tried to continually move forwards until we came up against significant resistance, destroy that with precision munitions, and then see what we can do from there. Which I think I would say is the vast difference in that Russians typically like to use like grid square artillery, but it's like a whole area saturated effect, which is what they tried to do to us there. And sometimes it can have really minimal effect. We had a significant force of dudes there. They absolutely leveled the sector of the village we were in, and we didn't take a single casualty from artillery that day, did we? So whereas we were using artillery in support on specific targets, which night and day difference there.
Yeah. Quality over quantity.
Exactly.
So the liberation of Kherson and the region is considered to be one of the most significant victories right now. We also, we already went through this. But aside of the emotional moment, why, in your opinion, is it such a big deal? Was at that time and maybe still is now?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before, discussing our thoughts on it. And I think for me, I would say that it solidified that southern region as the Dnieper being that point that the Russians go no further than. They are solidly back on the left bank there now, give or take their skirmishes and whatnot in the middle ground. But the ability for them to cross back over the Dnieper and gain that foothold again is significantly reduced. And then I think the point that you brought up.
Yeah, the fact that, because it's pretty much a linchpin, almost an entryway into, which is one of our ultimate goals, right? Crimea. That particular zone, they cannot let go, so they have to commit a lot of troops and equipment to that area. Even if they can't push themselves out or push themselves forward, they have to keep us from going through. So the fact that the Russians have to hold that so tightly now has resonated across the line in the way of, or in the form of, a weaker Russian line. Now that's not to say that that's we can just go wherever we want and do whatever we want on the line. But I would say that over the last couple of years now, if Kherson didn't happen the way that it did, and it wasn't being held like it is right now, we would see a lot of events not happen the way they had. Bakhmut would have fallen a lot faster, I think. The Kursk incursion probably would have been on the table, and so many other villages and cities and battlefields we would see drastically different outcomes on those fields. So, taking Kherson strategically and tactically is probably one of the more important events that has happened and continues to resonate as being important. On the kind of the PR or political side, however you want to look at it, right? Kherson was the only capital city that they had, right? So or oblast capital city that they had, and taking that away is a big smack in the face, nice little bloody nose for the Russian propaganda machine and Putin himself. So yeah, so that side of things great for morale as well. Again, taking back one of your major cities is always a great morale booster. Holding it still to this day, despite the disparity of equipment and manpower, is also continues to be one of those shining beacons for the Ukrainian forces, for us to kind of mount up, get behind.
When I was preparing for this interview, we usually post the teaser in our community. Many, Russia sympathizers said that this is the last anniversary of Kherson being liberated, and soon, within 7 weeks, it will be ours again. What do you have to answer to that?
I mean, what they said they were going to take Kyiv in like 3 days, right? So I feel like the Russians aren't really super squared away with this estimating their timetables on stuff. It's a pretty bold claim to make, but yeah, I don't think that's super realistic for them.
Clearly, they're off their meds. Somebody was supposed to be locked away in a room and found their way over to someone's cell phone and got on there. No, I mean, yeah, it's not a lot of the Russian goals that they've put out there. I don't think they've ever met a single one of their timelines that they've actually.
I'd be pretty surprised.
Yeah. And because they said they were going to take, like you said, they said they were going to take Kyiv in a few days. Or a couple weeks, they said they were going to take over Bakhmut within a certain while, right? Mm-hmm. Look how long that took, right? It's the same thing with the battles of Severo, Chasiv Yar, all these big goals that come out, and they're like, yes, we're going to take it. How many anniversaries have they've been like? It's the Russian independence. Yeah. So they're not getting it. Yeah. They're not getting it. It's wishful thinking on their part. Yeah. They're not getting it.
Hopefully so. I'm also sure. We have a question from our viewers. Unfortunately, I forgot the name. I'm so sorry. What is the main difference in the nature of fighting then and now? I guess it means in general. How did the warfare change over these almost
drone density?
Yeah, I know, right? Every time.
Oh, and this is a question that comes from the DIU recruit, and he's coming in February. So welcome, and we're I guess
right on.
all waiting for you. Respect, really. That's cool.
Yeah.
Now to the question.
Drone density is the easy answer. It's the easy answer is drone density. But on a more positive note, I would say the level of training, the quality of training that our forces are getting, both on the Legion side of things and also on the Ukrainian Army side of things. I've seen guys. It's definitely night and day. I think from when I first got here to what it is now. You see guys in trenches and bunkers and other facilities, and they hold themselves far more professionally, far more confidently, I think, than they did when they first started. There was, some of them had like kind of a wild, I don't know if wild look in their eye would be the best. Like it's not really like wild, like they're crazy or anything. It's more like, there's the shock of being in that position, because again, we see a lot of guys who are firefighters or bakers and everything. Military life was never on their agenda, and here they are now. But now they're holding them. A lot of these people are holding themselves a lot more confidently. You see the actual discipline. You see some of the training and knowledge being utilized more comprehensively and everything. So it's definitely night and day as far as the training side of things goes. And I think that I'm for our side again more positive than just. They're filling the skies with drones. I think that would be probably one of the biggest differences.
And by the way, we have an ongoing fundraising for the Astra team of the International Legion DIU. We are fundraising $7,000 to purchase electronic warfare device that will save the lives of our fighters and help them deliver their tasks and fight the enemy easier. So. Follow our QR code and or the link below. Thanks so much for participating. I guess we're running towards the end of this program, but I just came up with one question. So, do you think if Ukrainian forces had the level of training, the level of training that there is now, back in the days when the Kherson liberation campaign was going, where do you think would the Ukrainian army be stopped at the time? It's just very highly theoretical. We're basically fantasizing here.
I mean, yeah, I think it would have been entirely possible for the Ukrainian forces to push all the way towards some of those larger buildups of defenses, like the massive lines that were pre-built towards Crimea in the south of the oblast there. But that relies so massively on so many things coming together, right? So yeah, purely theoretical there. But I don't want to say that the lack of training is always such a negative thing, because that void is always filled by something else. So a lot of like we saw in the early days of the war, not everyone was super conventionally trained, but then that kind of just left this room for creativity and ingenuity and improvisation in tactics to fill it instead. And if people say that being creative doesn't come into warfare, get out of here. Sometimes just thinking outside the box and doing things differently is what makes all the difference. So if you have a guy who is willing to hang it out there and risk it and then do a new tactic because he hasn't been trained to think in this very rigid by the PAM method, he might come up with something that is just absolutely game changing. So pros and cons, yeah.
All right, thanks a lot. It was super interesting actually to go back in that time, because I think as for you also, to me it seems like ages away, and at the same time it was not that far away, because the timeline in Ukraine is completely messed up.
It's definitely a time warp going on right here.
So anyways, thanks a lot for taking the time, and thanks to your dear viewers for watching us, for supporting us, and hopefully we'll see you soon in the next couple of weeks. And thanks, guys. I hope also we'll see each other sometime soon. Who knows where?
Yeah. No, thank you for having us on.
Thanks.
Thanks.